Welcome, everyone. We know it's 4 o'clock, so we're just going to give folks another minute or two to log on, and then we'll get started. Please do go ahead and share in the chat if you're able, your name, where you're from, and what year your student is in school. And we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. All right. Hello and welcome, everybody, to our November Panther Family Coffee Chat. We still got people hopping on, and we certainly are aware there's some severe weather moving through the area. So I'm certain some folks are having potential connection issues. There is a phone number you can join with as well, available at the Panther Family website under the Coffee Talk tab or on the Facebook event if that's easier for you. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Carrie Deuce, and I'm the Director of External Relations for UWM, and we're here to talk about the Panther Family Association. We won't be using the raise your hand feature today, so if you have questions, even now, you can start putting them in the chat if you would like, and we'll get to them as we move through our presentation. The Panther Family Association, of course, as always, mission is to build a collaborative relationship with parents and families for the common goal of student learning, personal growth and development, student success, and engagement with UM. Today, we're going to cover a couple of great topics. We're going to talk about university housing, we're going to talk about dining services, and we're going to talk about what spring course delivery is going to look like. I know some folks might also have some questions about winterim, so please do, again, just let us know what you'd like to talk about because we have some great experts with us here today. So what Panther Family Association, we're here to serve you as parents and family members. There's no fee. We try to share timely resources like we are today with you so you can help your student, and we host events so that you can learn more about UWM. And many of you have probably already gone through the family checklist. You know, it's certainly shared with you during orientation as well as throughout the year, but feel free to sign up for future coffee talks. So this is actually the last one of this semester. So we'll start hosting them again in February 2021. Sign up for Panther Family News if you're not already on our email list. We've got about 11,000 parents on that list, and it comes to you about every 2 weeks with great updates about UWM. Join the Facebook group. That's where this topic was generated from. We love your feedback. We love to answer your questions, and it's just a great way to network with other parents. The Panther Family website has a lot of robust information on it, including our online family guide, which is categorized in ways to help you information. So when your student has a question and says, I don't know what to do, you can kind of look there and help them along when they're in that time of need. Certainly, we always encourage you to buy Panther merchandise at shopuwm.com or when you're on campus in the Panther shop. And you can show your Panther pride digitally by utilizing all of our fun Facebook and Instagram online fun digital images, and those are available for you and your students as well. All right, so today we've got some great panelists. We've got Adrian here from City Housing, Scott from Restaurant Operations, and hopefully we'll hear from Laura here in a little bit from Academic Affairs. But again, feel free to go ahead and put into the chat any questions you have. But what we'll do is give each person a little bit of time to introduce themselves, share a little bit about what their area's been working on, and then we'll get to your questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with Adrian. So Adrian, welcome to your first Panther Family Coffee Chat. If you'd like to hop on and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I think I am active here. So hello, my name is Adrian Burkholtz. I am the Contracts and Assignments Coordinator in University Housing. I actually just joined UWM's team in March, right before everything kind of went a little haywire. So I'm still in my first year and getting accustomed to all of the ins and outs of all of our practices and procedures at UWM. But we've got a good semester going. Some things to think about as we're moving forward. We're obviously getting close to the end of this fall term, and so some students are probably making plans to leave for breaks and head home. So things to think about, especially we do get some questions at this time of year about terminating students' contracts and what that process looks like. So for students who would not be returning in the spring semester, they probably want to start thinking about that now and getting the termination process in the works. When they submit for termination, they'll actually tell us day and their reason for leaving are, and then our staff will contact your students directly and set up an exit interview with them to talk about any applicable charges based on their reason and based on the date that they believe they'll be moving out by. We do encourage students who are not going to be returning to campus for the spring semester to complete their move out by December 23rd, because that way we can get accounts cleaned up and there shouldn't be any spring charges at that point, again, depending on their reason for termination. Other things, if you are a parent of an incoming spring student, we will start releasing our spring-only contracts starting November 20th. Spring always depends on space available. At this time, we look that we'll have a fair amount available, but we also do depend on spaces that are vacated by students who might be graduating or doing other activities, internships, things like that for the spring semester that take them away from campus. With that, we do have a modified timeline, and we have modified the cancellation deadline for spring-only contracts from December 1st to December 15th to give students a little more time to kind of figure out what spring is going to look like for them, because we know they're all looking at coming in, what classes might be available, and how that'll work for them. And then for incoming students who do complete new contracts, they'll want to have all of their preferences on their contracts updated by December 31st, so the end of the year. And then we expect to release their assignments on January 8th. So those are some good things to keep in mind if, depending on individual situations. overall, this fall, we've had a good fall. We did institute biweekly testing for all COVID testing for all residents, and that has generally been a very positive experience for us in helping mitigate any potential issues. We saw a little uptick probably in our first 2 weeks as the testing was initiated and caught things up. We saw it dip after that, and we're seeing a little more activity now after Halloween, we think might be part of the reason. And also we're seeing some general cold and flu going around at the same time. So, but generally that has been good, and students have been very cooperative in following our isolation and quarantine guidelines as needed, and also taking part in different virtual programs and events that our staff have been having. We do still have some programs and activities for our students who are staying with us on campus. A lot of those events are hybrid events. They might be things that they can grab a set of supplies and go back to their rooms or go back to a floor lounge to congregate with a couple others. A lot of the times when we do make space available, the capacity is dependent on the size of the space and current guidelines. Some other things to note is this week is homecoming. So it's our stay at homecoming, and we in the halls have Pounce Fest events throughout the week, and there is a virtual concert this Friday. Students can get tickets for that virtual concert or service desks in their communities. Other events to note is every Thursday night there's a program hosted by the PAC or PAC, and that happens every Thursday night at 9:27. This week's event is bingo, so they will have some activities going on with that. And then the RAs or resident advisors in the communities do host virtual events once a month, and each week have lounge events where they do different activities. It might be grab and go items again. This week they're decorating banners for homecoming. And then the other thing to note that you might be interested in is RA applications for next academic year. We're working on that process now, and that information should be released to students between the fall and winter breaks. So if that's something your student would be interested in, we do encourage them to talk with their resident advisor and then watch out for that information between the two breaks. See. Trying to see if there were any questions for me. Seeing none, I will still be here and available if something does come in, and if we have time to answer things at the end. But I'm really happy to be part of the UWM family and working with all of your students, and I'm happy to help them out with whatever their needs might be.
Thanks, Adrian, for all of that. I'm going to jump in here. My name is Kevin O'Connor, also from External Relations, and kind of guide us through some of the back and forth as we maneuver through some of the topics that we know we want to get to, and some of the other people that are on this call today. Again, as we've mentioned a few times, if you have specific questions you'd like us to address, you can drop those in the chat, and we'll be happy to do that. Sounds like perhaps the chat function isn't working according to a message that just popped up. So stand by, at least for the parents, we're able to chat back and forth on this end. So stand by on that, and we'll see if we can click a button that will make that active again for our guests that are on the call. In the meantime, I'll turn the floor over to Scott Hoffland, our Director of Restaurant Operations, for kind of a quick overview on the semester thus far, and updates and other things that might like to be shared from a dining standpoint. Scott, I'll give you a chance to chat with our families a little bit.
Well, thanks a lot, Kevin. My name is Scott Hoffland. I'm the Director of Restaurant Operations and the Director of Retail Services, and I'll explain what that means in just a little bit. I am also a proud Panther. I graduated back in the dark ages with degrees from both the school at Lubar School of Business and LNS. So I am proud to wear my Panther Pride on my sleeve and in all that I do. At restaurant operations, we've had a good year as well, but a much different year than we're accustomed to. If your students have shared any comments with you at all about food service or any of the other services that we provide, we don't look anything like we have in past years. And that isn't because we didn't want to be that way. It is because those are the public health rules that we have to follow. And the team that I supervise continues to look at new and innovative ways that we can service students. And we are constantly meeting with both our Sandburg Hall's administrative governance group that helps advise us on what students want, and we're getting ready to roll out some new changes for spring semester. We do provide contactless service, and so that's part of what we need to do to keep our environment safe. We rolled out in 10 days a mobile ordering app that I'll admit was really bumpy when we first rolled it out, but we gotten really good at using it. And so students are using that to order their food. We provide service in a number of different areas, not only in Sandburg, but also in Cambridge. And both in the convenience store and the cafeterias in both locations. We'll be rolling out some additional offerings in spring, so there'll be more to come on that. And for the first time ever, we are allowing students to use their meal plans in the flower shop in the union and take advantage of their discount. And they have a series of revolving specials that they run so that students have an opportunity if they happen to be over in that side of campus, or if they just want to change the pace, and they're able to use their meal plans there. In addition to our responsibilities of feeding our students who live in the residence halls, we're also responsible for feeding those students who end up in isolation or quarantine as a result of the antigen or PCR testing. And I'm happy to report that that is also going well. Students are able to get meals on a regular basis, both from a selection, a menu that's custom for them, but also from the cafeteria in Cambridge and Palm Gardens, should they miss the order cutoffs. And so we continue to refine that, and we're looking for new ways to reach out to students who end up in those situations so that they get the service that they need in those particular situations. In addition to that, we do have our coffee shop open, at Sandburg, and we have the coffee shop open at the Union. We also have a convenience store open at the Union called Union Station that has a large selection of fresh prepared cold entrees and salad. And we continue to modify as many of our offerings as we possibly can. It is interesting to note that with our limited service, it is probably pretty easy for students to get bored. And so we're looking at implementing a new menu cycle for spring semester that will allow for more variety and more options for students, so they don't end up having that boredom with our menus. So mentioned earlier also that I have I'm responsible for retail services. That also includes things like the Panther Shop, which Carrie mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, which is our spirit shop. And I'm also responsible for course materials acquisition, so our contract with eCampus and managing some of those activities as well. So we do have a broad reach being in student affairs, we focus on those things to take care of students. With that said, I saw a couple of questions pop up on the chat, but Kevin, I cannot see the chat. I can see ours, but I cannot see the chat from the parents. So if you can fill me in on some of the questions when the time is appropriate.
Absolutely, we'll do that. And you've referenced some things that have come up in the chat. We'll circle back and certainly hit on a few of those other things as well. And I know the other topic that we had put on the agenda today involved academics, and more specifically the spring semester and how that was looking to be shaping up. And I know we were hoping to have Laura Pedrick from Academic Affairs on this call to give us more of a behind the scenes look of how they've come to some of these thoughts. But Carrie, I know you can jump in a little bit. We've publicized this now for the last couple of weeks, but sort of the guide thus far on what students, as they're registering now, can expect to be finding relative to the makeup of their spring class schedule.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of really good points that have gone to students, but we certainly are aware that there's some email fatigue for students right now, so they're not always seeing some of these updates. A couple of different pieces to mention here. First and foremost, UWM intends to return to the same class structure post-Thanksgiving that we're in now. So if your student has an in-person class now, they'll come back to that in-person class post the Thanksgiving break. An email is going to go to students likely tomorrow, letting them know about increased testing availability on campus. We are encouraging students to get tested if they're going to return home for Thanksgiving, and to quarantine after that test so that they're not bringing potential COVID home with them. Now, of course, that's a very personal family decision, but that information about rapid testing, the very quick sort of PCR, less invasive tests are available in the student union multiple days a week for students, whether they live on or off campus. So that information is going to them this week. So no change in class mode after Thanksgiving as of this time at UWM. We do know some of the other UW system campuses are approaching that differently, so want to make sure that that's clear. So the great thing about registering for spring courses is your student's enrollment date has populated now in PAWS, which is the student enrollment system. And so they can log in and see what day they can enroll. They can start loading classes into their shopping cart. Many of them have probably already met with their advisor virtually or potentially in person to go through the best course selection options, both potentially for winterim and for spring semester. This is the time of year where academic advisors are just super busy working with our students. We expect that most classes will be sort of, in-person, hybrid, or online, similar to how they were this fall. So instructors who chose to teach in person this fall likely will teach in person in the spring, so on and so forth. The big change we are looking at for spring is there'll probably be less shifting mid-semester. We know for some instructors it was challenging managing the classes in one format or another. Certainly sometimes course delivery had to change because of positive COVID tests. Sometimes the pedagogy of like the course needed to change. There's certain courses that are needed for accreditation or for students to be licensed. So a lot of factors there. But the good news is now this fall for many departments, they've been able to work out those kinks. So what is listed in the schedule of classes is what a student should expect. On the schedule of classes, and I'll drop it in the chat here in a minute, your student can actually even search by instruction methods. So we know, as an example, students living in university housing really want to make sure they have at least a couple classes in person. And so look for those classes and sort by the ones that are only in person. So we definitely encourage students to really look through that course catalog and get prepared. At UWM, as I think it is at many campuses, it's really competitive to get those classes. So we encourage students to load them in their shopping cart. So those are kind of the high level overviews, and certainly I'm happy to answer additional questions. Every program has different nuances to it. It depends if your student's a first year student, a senior. There's going to be potential considerations if your student's doing undergraduate research or if they want to study abroad at some point during their career. So certainly always checking in with their academic advisor. as well as looking for what their eligibility is for financial aid. A lot of students don't realize they do have eligibility for financial aid for a interim course. And, certainly right now, what a great time to pick up an extra 3 credits. So those are kind of the high level reviews there, Kevin, if you want to go into some of the other questions.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll do some catch up here on the chat a little bit. You can keep posting your questions in there. I know our panelists can see the questions as well, but I'll try to direct a little bit of traffic. And I know the first couple that we had in the chat and that came in by email were toward housing. And so Adrian, I'll start with you. And I know you likely had a chance to kind of see some of these anyways, but one of the email questions was the refund policy for housing if a student decides to do classes from home for the spring semester, and sort of, I suppose, a follow-up to that of leaving housing with no fee under the spring under certain situations and what those situations might be. So maybe the best, broadest way to answer that is talk to us about students who maybe are in this fall and for one reason or another are reconsidering their return this spring and where that stands and what they might need to do.
Certainly. So the first thing I would encourage you and your student to do is review the section on termination in their housing contract. I believe it's page 11, section G, and that section will actually give them a lot of information about what we phrase as an approved reason for termination and an unapproved reason for termination. If somebody wants to move out, we will let them. We're not going to stop them and say, no, you can't. But those reasons will end up dictating any potential costs involved with that departure from campus. So definitely I would recommend reading that section of their contract guidebook. It is available on our website, and it should be in their My Housing portal as well for them to find that way. But generally, in terms of no fees, I'll say the typical reason for not having any fees for spring semester is enrollment. So if they're with us now and they won't be enrolled in spring because they graduated or are stopping out for a little bit, or maybe they have an internship that takes them away from campus, so they can't, living on campus doesn't make it possible for them to get to that internship location. Those would be reasons for an approved termination, and they would be released without any additional cost. Other reasons would be considered unapproved, and those would, per the contract, end in 85% of the remaining contract. We do have an appeals process for that. So if somebody's classes all go online because of COVID, they could put in an appeal for that reason, and our appeals committee would review that, kind of taking into consideration all of the students' reasons for doing that. Typically, online classes isn't a reason to receive a full refund, but under certain circumstances this year, the appeals committee is reviewing and approving some of those. With that too, I would say definitely the student should try and make that decision and move out or complete their move out before December 23rd, because after that date, then you start getting into some spring rent charges, and it's much easier to clean it up ahead of time than go back and try and prorate certain things afterwards. So I'd say time is of the essence. If they can make a decision sooner rather than later, it would benefit them. And I think that got those questions, but certainly I'm here for any further explanation or clarification if need be.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. What I was going to follow up on is more of not a question to clarify your answer, to sort of remind folks that while we do our best to get in the weeds here and provide specific information, I certainly like to remind folks on this call that we do have resources after the fact, right, to have your questions answered. And along with our Panther Families email address, which we shared earlier when folks couldn't get in the chat, and the ability to contact us and us to then help you connect with the right person. Perhaps the most obvious follow-up I have on some of these subjects that are going to be personal, going to change student to student. Maybe it's hard to get the exact answer in this forum out. If it's a student, a family member, some combination that's thinking about this, or just is confused or has questions, like what's the most direct route? Where should they turn in housing to perhaps try to work through their situation and get a little bit better understanding of how it's going to impact them?
Yeah, great question. So our main housing office is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Students can always walk in or call us. Phone is a great resource. Our direct line can be found on our website, but it is, if anybody's, and I can drop it in the chat here too, our main line is 414-229-4065. So we can certainly answer questions by phone. We do have an email address. It's university-housing@uwm.edu. If you just do housing, it's going to end up in neighborhood housing, and they're great partners who send us those appropriate questions. But our email address is university-housing@uwm.edu. And we can, we know everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. So if there are some uniqueness to the situation, please call us or email us, and we'll do our best to answer the questions with the information known.
Great, thanks, Adrian. And again, that information, that email address, that phone number, a link to some of the policies and guidebook information, all has been placed in the chat as well. And again, for many of these subjects, especially when it comes to housing contracts, and that we know it can be in individual situations. So some resources that you can reach out to, or your student can reach out to, and perhaps get some more clarification on their specific situation. I know we did touch on some academic matters in the spring semester and even winterim earlier. Laura Pedrick has joined us. Laura, I'm just going to give you a heads up that I'll circle back to you to talk a little bit more about the spring semester here in a moment or two. But I do want to make sure to get the ball rolling a little bit on some of the questions that are in the chat relative to dining services. And so Scott, I'm going to circle back to you. A few different lines of questions that have come along, but I see one that's popped up from a few folks in particular, again, to try to narrow it down a little bit, and that's the availability of healthy options, the timing that some of those are available, the cost, and any discounts that are available or not available on those. Folks wondering about how their students can go about accessing healthy options, and concerns that perhaps as they're accessing those healthy options, that it's costing them more money, and they're reaching a point in the semester where perhaps their meal money is not going to last them until the end of the semester.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and the good news is, as I was pointed in the right direction on the chat, so I can at least address these a little bit more specifically. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from our students over the last couple of weeks is they want to see more. And one of our first questions talks about expanded daily specials and something different. At this point in time in the semester, things are starting to get boring, and I can understand that, and we've heard that loud and clear both from our student customers, but also from our partners in Hall government. So we're working on trying to do that. That's certainly understandable when we went from only being able to have 8 locations across the entire expanse of our campus, when we normally have 31 locations open. And part of that is due to the public health rules that we have to follow in the city of Milwaukee, but part of it is just the sheer population on campus and the resources that we have in labor. So yes, the answer is we are going to be expanding into some daily specials, a rotating menu, which I mentioned earlier, and so we can try and address that issue of things being boring. And so that's kind of what the plan is for spring. We've also see a couple of questions about running out of meal money. Meal money is, certainly one of those things that students manage on a daily basis, and based on their purchasing decisions, because we're an entirely retail environment, it certainly makes a difference in what they're buying. But we also provide 50% off as part of the meal plan. So there are select items in all of our items in our cafeteria locations, our Palm Garden and our Cambridge locations are at 50%. And we added a large selection of 50% off items also in the Restore locations, which never existed before. Those menus are currently under review, and we're trying to get some student feedback on those items as well. We do sell an awful lot of items through those locations, so we know that they are popular with students. It's just making sure the right mix is there and switching it up often enough that folks don't get bored. Oftentimes when we hear that we don't have enough variety in what we are offering, it translates to we're predictable. That we know that we're going to have this item or that item on Tuesday or on Thursday every week. And so we have to be aware of that and respond to that. There's also a question here about fruits, vegetables, and salads are not included in the 50% off. And we do have a selection of fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and salads that are included in the 50% off in the Restore locations, but they are not in the Palms or cafeteria locations. And I'm also seeing a question here about why can't the main cafeteria in Sandburg be open? That's a great question. We would love nothing more than to have the main cafeteria open, but the public health rules in the city of Milwaukee prevent us. Most of our stations in the main cafeteria were build your own. Think about salad bars and fruit bars and self-service soup and beverages and those types of things. Even build your own taco or burrito bowls or things like that. Under our current health guidelines, we can't offer any of that right now. So that's why Sandburg Cafeteria is not open. And I'm looking through the last of there's a question here also about will the flower shop be open on the weekends coming up in the spring? Great question. We had not talked about that, but it's certainly something that I'll take back to the team and see what can be done about that. In the past weeks of this semester, the union had limited service hours. But that doesn't mean that we can't take a look at that. So, and I'm just looking to see what else we have. If you have
Scott, I'll jump in here real quick and just
one of the things
that, again. We can sort of guide, and it's not that the families can't provide their feedback in these methods I'm going to ask you about as well, but I know the students that are in person, that are there, that are in the midst of going through and figuring out what they want, what they can get, what's open. I know there's a form, there's some other ways. What's the best way for a student or again a family member to provide you all some constructive feedback and express what might be more helpful, more of interest to them?
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, that's great. The best way to reach out to us is at uwm.edu/dining. That will take you to our website, and there is a contact us link. But if you click on that, that actually comes directly to my office. It comes directly to my desk. And my responsibility is to triage that inquiry, that concern, that compliment, whatever the issue is, and we then will get you to the right person to answer that question. We generally turn those around in 24 hours, and it is also open to our students. We do not have any walk-in offices where folks can come in and just visit with us. So the uwm.edu/dining, contact us is the best way to get a hold of us.
Great, thank you, Scott, for that. And again, we'll certainly circle back if other questions pop up, and as we sort back through the chat on anything that we might have missed, we'll do our best to get back to it. As I mentioned, Laura Pedrick has joined us as well to talk a little bit about the academic side of things. And Laura, Carrie did give a pretty good summary about the public information that I think we've been sharing lately about the spring semester and our continued mix of in-person, hybrid, and online classes. I think in particular, since we know probably all of our students, if not very close to all of our students, will continue to experience some classes in the online or virtual environment. And I know of the many different hats that you wear. That online environment is one that you've been deeply involved in long before we reached this stage here in COVID, where we were offering so many of our classes in that format. To talk a little bit about the resources that are available, about how students can really reach out in a variety of ways to make sure they're getting the most out of their online classes. Talk to us a little bit about some of those things that families can remind their students of, and how we help our students continue to get the most out of their classes at UWM.
Well, thanks very much, Kevin, and to everyone, my apologies for not showing up in a timely manner to the session. A couple things about some context setting. UWM has historically been the educator of more online students than any other institution, public or private, in the state of Wisconsin. We have a very long history dating back to 1996-97 in online. We have faculty who are national award winners we have the National Online Educator of the Year here at UWM from a couple years back. So we do have a lot of experience. Our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning has dramatically ramped up all of its offerings and converted them to fully online offerings for faculty development. We do have, I've posted in the chat here, tips for online student success. But if there's one phrase that I think is crucially important to online success, it's time management. It is can be relatively easy for a student to overlook a deadline, and it's really important to check into their online classes on a daily basis and to just stay current with the work. The post to tips for online success does cover a lot of the ground I'm going to be going over, but there are some things that aren't there that I particularly wanted to talk to you all about. One of them is, if your student has a problem in an online class, your student should reach out to his or her advisor, because we are very committed as an institution to having outstanding learning environments for all students. And we have, given that the large majority of our instruction moved online, we have put into place additional systems for communication. So we have a communication pathway between advisors and our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And if your student is experiencing a problem that relates to the quality of instruction, the advisor is the person to go to. The other thing I did want to mention, and it's in the link I sent sort of at the bottom, it's resources for online learning. UWM has a really robust infrastructure for online student support. Virtually everything, except maybe the bowling and the union, is now available online. But all kidding aside, we do have a virtual student union with notifications about virtual events on campus. And there are also many other supports. We have a dedicated distance education librarian, but right now, basically all of our librarians are available online. We have an online writing center. We have online tutoring and peer mentoring. And we have 24/7 support for our learning management system, Canvas. And all of that is available off that link. But I really do want to emphasize how critically important it is to simply be present in your online class. Faculty and it can see whether or not a student has logged in, whether or not a student has opened course content, and they're monitoring that because that's a real crucial, a student who sort of might disappear a bit during the semester is really not setting themselves up for success, and will likely be getting outreach from our advising network and or from their advisor to rejoin the academic community. I do know that it is a very different experience than we were thinking this academic year would be for students, and it is an adjustment. But I would also say strongly that we have the most experienced group of faculty teaching online classes of any institution, and I know that instructors are looking to help students, and so are advisors and our student support staff. So please encourage your student, A, to log on a lot daily, and B, to take advantage of these many, many resources. Faculty are expert users of our learning management system, and they, in addition to teaching online, they are also doing their office hours online. They are available for one-on-one consultations with students, and are more than happy to help students at any point during the semester. Let's see, are there any, Kevin, have there been questions at all addressed pertinent to online students?
Not at this moment. There haven't been, Laura, but certainly now that you've had a chance to speak to everyone, we'll remind folks that they could drop those questions in the chat. Certainly, if they do, the one that I'll just follow up with a little bit that I think, knowing how we land where we land, and I know you're one of many people that are involved in this, but I mean, is there a 60-second summary of sort of that matrix of how we've gone about determining what classes will be in person, what's online, what's hybrid, how we have all of the space? I mean, I know this harkens back to the many meetings and discussions of the summer, but I guess broadly the idea that there's lots of moving parts and lots of factors that play into how the course delivery method lands when that schedule is finally published, isn't there?
Absolutely, and I think there was a group, a planning group that met on a weekly and sometimes daily basis to plan for fall semester, and the group operated with several guiding principles at the behest of the chancellor. And those guiding principles were, first, that we follow public health guidance on safe spacing of classes, which meant that we needed to minimize, if we needed to have social distancing in place and be concerned not only about social distancing within a classroom, and within classrooms, that meant roughly 40% of the space was now usable to create buffers, but also in between classes, the flow of people through buildings. And we relied on science to decide upon a buffer period between classes that is longer than we would normally do. Some of the principles, so we knew we had an overall smaller amount of space available for face-to-face instruction, so we had to prioritize that. And the top priorities were experiential learning classes that really aren't super well suited to online, although in an absolute pinch you could do most of them online, but classes like chemistry labs, performance classes in the Peck School of the Arts, some of the equipment, some of the software labs, like the specialized software in the journalism program. So those classes tended to remain face-to-face. We also made a priority for first-year students because we knew there would be students living in the residence halls and really wanted them to have the opportunity for face-to-face classes. And then there was just sort of there are at the graduate level, there are more small seminar type classes. And so it skewed a little bit toward upper division classes because those tend to have fewer students from the get-go. There were also state level restrictions on the number of people meeting. So we don't have a huge number of 100 student plus classes, but those all went online. And we were left with, probably for most people, 35 or 40% to, on face-to-face, and the bulk being online. And we are following a similar pattern for spring semester. And our winterim classes, those we don't have very particularly large number of those this year. Those are all online. It's just a 3-week intercession between fall and spring semester. But Professor Diane Reddy, the director of our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, went through basically every single class that and graded it according to every class that was slated to be offered face to face, and basically applied the decision criteria to it. And then the group met and we shared those findings with the provost and chancellor, and that's where we wound up with the classes that we had. We do understand that for many students, they really wanted face-to-face classes, but in the current COVID climate, we have to, prioritize student health and well-being. And I would also say that in any given semester, we do have a lot of students taking online classes simply because it allows them to, have maximum flexibility with their schedules. So, Kevin, was there anything else relative to that topic that you would like to cover?
Oh, that's great. And Catherine has placed the link to CEDL in the chat, and I would remind our families on the line as well that I think almost every edition of the Panther Family News, as well as a previous version of our Coffee Talk, has talked about some of the great resources that are available to students to get the most out of their education in general, and at this time in their online education in particular. And we'll continue to share that information and certainly continue to remind folks that while we understand for some, maybe more than some students, certain classes, it's to them not ideal that it's online. There are ways they can get more out of it. And as we continue to find as well, some students, when you mentioned, Laura, the maximum flexibility, the ability to maybe squeeze in one extra class along the way, the winterim that you've brought up and Carrie brought up earlier as well. And that online format, I mean, there are some ways to maximize some of the virtual offerings in making it possible to maybe get squeeze a little bit more out of some of these opportunities at this time. A couple of questions that have popped up as we start to wind down time that I do want to get to. I think, Adrian, you're probably where I'm going to go first here in particular with the question that was in the chat. Not all that long ago now, about somebody terminating their housing contract to perhaps move off campus in an effort to save money, and what portion of their housing or meal plan would be refunded. I know we've talked a little bit about reaching out to get specific information about your own specific situation, but using that as a hypothetical, tell us a little bit about what that may look like.
Certainly. So the biggest question is if they're going to still be enrolled. If they're going to be enrolled in classes for the spring, whether in person or online, they are still responsible for the remaining time of their contract. So at best, if approved, or if they do terminate, they're still going to be responsible for 100% of the fees up to the time they turn in their room keys, so until they move out. And then after that, they're responsible for 85% of the remaining contract. So, and that's just the standard contract language. It's an academic year contract, so it's not necessarily, their current contract doesn't end at the end of fall just because it's the end of fall. They did agree to an academic year contract. However, there is an appeals process. So if they terminate and feel that it should be reviewed further, we do encourage students to participate in the appeals process to go more in depth for why they're choosing to terminate their contract. And at that point, it could be adjusted. But typical standard contract language is they'd still be responsible for 100% through their date of move out, plus 85% of the remaining for both their dining and rent costs.
All right, thanks for that answer, Adrian. And the one other question that popped up swings to Scott. I'm sure, Scott, you've seen it. I know folks do typically ask about the administrative fee and sort of how that is working or does work in these times as well. I think an interesting question as far as what modifications might take place to some of the service environments, I suppose, not just heading into the second semester, but going forward as to how this impacts your operation in so many ways, and how you continue, I'm sure, to look at ways that you may be able to adjust how that looks to provide even more offerings.
Yes, Kevin, that's a great question. Is there a plan to modify Sandburg Cafeteria? And the answer to that is yes, there is a plan. We have a couple of different options that we're going to be presenting to the Administrative Council at Sandburg Hall on Thursday for their input and their feedback. The challenge, of course, that we face is we do not know what the public health rules are going to look like in January, but we are actively planning for new additions, new ways of service, new locations of service. I mentioned earlier we only have 8 of our 31 locations open because of either style of service or population on campus. So the answer is yes, there is a plan to modify Sandburg Cafeteria, and we will put that plan into place based on the best advice that we have from public health experts, the rules, public health rules in the city of Milwaukee, and the rules on campus.
Thank you very much, Scott. And actually, you know, it's a good quick circle back here, Adrian, before, and then Carrie, I'll toss it to you to wrap it up. But as the question gets posed in the chat about contacting housing governance, Adrian, that not just that, like in general, I think, you know, we try to remind families to remind their students all the time how many different ways they have to get involved and make their voices heard. And we know in regular times how important those governance councils and housing are to organizing great activities like deciding what's going to happen and what's not going to happen, what some of those opportunities are. Students want their voices heard. Where do they go within, literally or figuratively, within the residence halls to make sure that they're a part of that process?
Sure. The Residence Hall student government body is called SHAC. So it's the Student Housing Advisory Committee, I believe. And the person who oversees it, her name is Rachel Amick. They can certainly contact her directly, but the easiest way for students to remember is through their RA. So if they talk to their RA and then want to get involved, they can help get your student connected to the correct person to get them involved and on that governance organization. Because we are certainly looking for students to get involved and want the student voice.
Thanks for sharing that, and it's a great way to pose that reminder of all the ways even now that your students still can get involved and begin to set the groundwork for being even more involved going forward. I see the clock though, so Carrie, I'll throw it back to you to make sure we haven't missed anything and to provide a wrap up on our session today.
Well, first, thank you to all of our session attendees and, you know, the UWM staff who took time out of their day. We do have our next Panther Family Coffee Chat scheduled for Tuesday, February 2nd at 4:30. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that will be an overview of housing options for next academic year. So It's a great time if your students talking about moving off campus, if they want to return to university housing. We'll have representatives from both offices available to assist. As always, if you have questions, please do email us at panther-families@uwm.edu, or make sure you put them into that Facebook group, because that's where we get all of our great ideas for the coffee chat. So thanks, everybody. Good luck with the weather if you're here in southeastern Wisconsin, and have a great night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.